Our next speaker is Andrew Johnson from CSIRO.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to make a few comments on the rather unambitious topic of decision support and natural resource management in 3 minutes, I think. So what I've chosen to do is just share with you some remarks and reflections from the Australian experience and particularly the Australian experience in the context of water resource management, and hopefully that will be instructive within the context of the wider discussion we're having. Just to situate my remarks in the Australian context, we've seen a very significant shift in the utilisation of participatory research approaches and whole of systems analysis and modelling to underpin policy, legislation, investment from the private sector and investment in research and development in natural resource management over the last 2 decades. However, the use of these approaches has raised, certainly in my country at least, very fundamental questions of a methodological nature and institutional issues that go to the heart of how research is conducted, what constitutes an outcome, who controls the agenda, and scientists' accountability to others. And in particular, and this goes to the heart of some of the comments Bill made in his framing presentation, I think it's also very much challenged the way in which scientists engage with society to achieve real action on the ground. As I said before, I'll use our experience in the context of water resources reform and water management to illustrate the domain of complex problem settings, multiple stakeholders, divergent interests and scales of relevance with which decision support and natural resource management activities in Australia are situated. And I'll give particular emphasis to discussing the evolving role of scientists as trusted advisors to the community. But first, let me just provide some context about the use of decision support in natural resource management in my country. In the Australian experience, and I think this is echoed globally as well, is that we've seen a predominance of technically focused compared with user-focused applications of decision support. And if I'm frank, and if we're brutally honest with ourselves, over the last 2 decades this has resulted, I think, in many unfulfilled expectations, non-delivery of impact, non-adoption of outcomes, at times irrelevance, inflexibility, inaccessibility for the users of the investments that were intended, leading often to a lack of confidence and trust both from policymakers and the wider community. And when you combine these with the intrinsic institutional and political barriers that go to making fundamental change in the sustainability context, this has very often led to negative impacts on decision-making processes, decision-making quality. But of course there have also been some successes, and I wouldn't mind just sharing one with you that has had a profound impact in my nation in the context of water reform. Just to set some macro context, in late 2007, Australia was approaching its 12th year in drought. There were only 2 areas in the country that were not drought declared. So it was a very significant issue for our nation. Our largest river basin, the Murray-Darling Basin, which occupies nearly 1/6 of the continental landmass, over 1 million square kilometres, was in ecological and socio-economic crisis, and there were very, very significant tensions between stakeholders who live in the basin and stakeholders who also live outside the basin. In late 2007, the Prime Minister and the governors of our state jurisdictions agreed that fundamental reform in the way in which the nation dealt with this crisis was required. But to their great credit, they also recognised that there was a need to provide a more sophisticated, nuanced and dynamic approach to the decision support that would be needed to underpin that reform process. And so they engaged with the scientific community through my own agency, CSIRO, and they asked us some very fundamental questions. How much water is actually in the basin? How might it change under a range of climate, land use and water management scenarios? And what might be the ecological, economic, social consequences of implementing those different scenarios? And at that stage there was no single model, no single conceptual framework, and from a hydrological perspective, no unified approach in one of the world's most naturally variable hydrological systems. The Prime Minister also added in his phone call to me in November 2007 that he wanted this sorted out in 12 months, and he looked forward to the results. So there was a fairly compelling imperative to get on and change the way we operated. through my own agency, a team of 170 scientists, technical specialists and community engagement professionals, and that last point is a pertinent one because again it goes to some of the issues that other panellists have discussed, were mobilised from across the nation and both from the public and private sectors. And it was probably the largest integrated multidisciplinary team of scientists, practitioners, community leaders that we've experienced. And in the end, the project was delivered on time, on budget and on scope. It was nearly 1.4 billion simulations, 1 million files of results, 19 regional reports, 40 technical reports, but most importantly, a deep, a rich and comprehensive process of engagement with the community, with industry leaders and with policymakers who, as Bill pointed out so clearly, were also a vast repository of knowledge, experience and wisdom around how the future of this basin might be managed. The outcomes of the work underpinned a fundamental reform in the way water is managed in my country. This enabled the establishment of a national water initiative, a single national water plan, and tomorrow my Prime Minister will announce a single plan for the basin that will go before Parliament on November 29. This is a very, very significant achievement that's been enabled by systems analysis and modelling. The successes of this work gave our policymakers, our leaders, the courage to also extend the remit to the other 2/3 of the country that also needed this sort of information, and also gave us the mandate to enable us to transition these decision support systems into operational use for the water management agencies who have a day-to-day responsibility for water use and management, and so that the legacy of this effort will endure for a long time. The other thing it's done is also engendered a fundamental change in the science policy and science community relationship in Australia, and in particular it's changed the community's expectations for their engagement in the scientific and policy processes in relation to the nation's water resources. There were some key learnings from this that I thought I might share with you, and again many of them go to the points that Bill raised. Some of them are probably self-evident, but they're nonetheless worth sharing. Firstly, I can't emphasise enough the criticality in ensuring legitimacy and mandate from the end users and the communities who benefit from these sorts of decision support approaches, and in particular that the end users understand the context in which the outputs of these sorts of initiatives will be situated in their own operations, so that they come to own the outcomes and thereby ensuring institutional agency. I can't also emphasise enough the criticality for the teams involved in ensuring relevance and salience. In my country at least, too often scientists have produced results that are convenient to the methods or models that they are most comfortable with. And one way of terming it is, for a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The other thing is it also highlights the criticality in expressing results clearly and not dominated by caveats. In other words, try and keep the signal to noise ratio low. The other critical learning is around transparency and auditability of the methods and the assumptions. Quality assurance is key to building community trust and confidence. And within that large team, we had a very, very significant and perhaps unprecedented effort around the QA, auditability and transparency of the methods and assumptions that we used. It also stressed the importance of robust communication protocols. As scientists, we don't often tend to apply the same rigour and discipline to our communications that we purport to apply in our core science activities. And again, this experience has shown us very clearly the return on investment that comes from excellence, rigour, discipline and precision in the way in which we communicate those results. It also demonstrated to us the critical need for flexibility and adaptability in the systems that we have. During the life of the project, there were very significant changes in personnel, particularly on the policymakers' side, and also in terms of some of the parameters we were dealing with. In combination, all of these things, when executed well, and I would argue that this initiative was executed well, go to the heart of some of the issues that I raised in the panel discussion yesterday, is that they build an enduring sense of trust and relationship between the science community and the wider community, and gives the community confidence to tackle some of the really difficult issues that we as a nation are facing. Thank you.